I have been working with Take Charge Today since 2015. I fell in love with their lessons and got the chance to become a trainer to actually help teachers learn about some of their lessons and other personal finance topics back in 2015. And we decided to join forces with them so that we could present this webinar to ACEE teachers as well. So for me, I picked the title, Taxes Don't Have to Be Scary, because I feel like adults either are okay with taxes or not. And I wanted you to feel confident that you'll learn some things tonight that you'll be able to share with your students. The lesson that we're going to look at tonight comes from the Take Charge Today website, and it is called Paying Your Income Taxes. What I have on the screen right now is a screenshot of the lesson, just the lesson overview when you type that into their search bar. So you can see up at the top, it gives us a lesson plan summary, and down at the bottom has the downloadable lesson materials. So if you don't have a Take Charge Today account, at the end tonight, we'll show you the website where you can go do that. But every lesson has these downloadable materials that are available for you to use. You can see there's a lesson plan and an information sheet that you can use for instruction. There's a PowerPoint presentation that goes with the lesson as well, in case you decide to use that with your students. We always have a test of some sort, and we've got the answer keys that go with that. And then you'll see there are student workbook pages. So the activities that are embedded in the lessons that we want students to do on a worksheet come in their own separate file. So it's very easy for you to click on that link. It'll download them into a zip file, and then you can put them right straight into your classroom learning system. If you have Schoology or Canvas or something like that, they can transfer into there, and it's really easy for you to get those to the students. Up at the top, if you look at the lesson summary, you will see that every lesson gives you a little teaser about what's to come. So in this particular lesson, we have several activities, including allocating tax dollars, a home talk activity, something we call attitudes about taxes, choosing what's important to spend tax dollars on, and then we're actually having students fill out a 1040 tax form. We want them to get the practice doing that. So we're going to look at a few of those just so you have some knowledge about what's included and can kind of get my tips on how to use them. I have turned them all into electronic versions of what we're going to do tonight, but we'll take a look at a few of them so you can be familiar with those. So the home talk is what I wanted to talk about first. We have created in the Take Charge curriculum several of these worksheets that we call home talk. And it is a activity, a one-page worksheet that you can send home with your students at the end of a lesson. And it's encouraging them to have a talk with somebody at home. We have home on there, but I always told my students they could use it with any kind of a trusted adult. So some of them would use it with another teacher or a coach, and sometimes they would just come talk to me about it. But it gave them a great opportunity to get an adult's perspective on some of the topics that we had been teaching them in the lessons. So this one is about taxes. And you can see in this one, we've done a couple of things. We have questions for the students to answer. So those questions about you, so that we can learn two things that they learned about government benefits and one thing that they learned about filing income taxes. And then there are some questions that they would ask an adult, including how old were you when you first filed your income taxes? And do you prepare them by yourself, or do you have somebody do them for you? So I love these activities, just a fun way to get students involved and talking to their families or other adults about the personal finance topics that we have taught them. The other activity that was in the introduction is called Attitudes About Taxes. And this is another worksheet that Take Charge Today has for different topics. I like to use this as the introductory activity when we're getting ready to learn about something new. So you can see this version that I have on the screen is fillable. So you can have the students fill that out online. I always like to print mine off, and then there were a couple different ways that I would use them with my students. Sometimes I would do a gallery walk. So I would take the questions, I'd put them on the big Post-it easel pads, put them around the room, hand each kid a marker as they walk into class, and I would have them walk around and answer every single question that they could. I love doing this about new topics because if they get to a question and they don't know the answer for it, most likely they're going to have somebody else's answers to look at already. And so they could just put an answer that somebody else had put on there, or they can read and learn from others. So I like to do it that way. I also like to kind of do a round robin style. So the kids would put their names on their paper. They would pick one of the questions. Usually these attitudes about activities have 12 questions on them. So they pick one question to answer, and then they pass their paper to somebody else, and somebody gives them a paper and they answer another question. Doesn't have to be in order, but we just pass them around until all the boxes are filled in. And then the paper comes back to the original owner. And again, they can learn from the other students. So they can see if they would have answered one of the other questions the same way that students did, or if they would do it differently, and just helps them learn. So just kind of another fun activity if you haven't ever done that before, that you might want to try with students. We're going to do a kind of an online version of this activity so that you guys can learn from each other. So if you hang on one second, I'm going to give you a link to a Padlet. And for those of you that haven't used a Padlet before, it's just kind of an online board where students can post answers to questions or give you details about something. So this is the link to the Padlet. If you'll go ahead and click on that. I don't know why Zoom is doing a screenshot now of those. That's really weird. But click on that, and when you get to the Padlet, you will see that I've just picked a few questions that came from that worksheet. And what you're going to do is to click on the little plus sign that's at the bottom, and I'm just having you pick 3 of these questions. So click on the little plus sign. It will give you a chance to add your name at the top, which you can do if you want to, you don't have to. And then just tell me how you would answer 3 of those questions. As people are posting, you should be able to see their answers pop up. And if not, you hit refresh and it will reload for you, or you can just look at my screen that's displaying for everybody now. Oh, I love that. Good answers. Good answers. Loving what you put on there. Some of these are harder, like students may not be familiar with legal services the government provides for us. And then you can pull out your driver's license and show them that, right? So you have examples around you that you could share with the students, which is kind of fun to help them get an idea of what you know about as well. So remember, this is just an activity that you would do at the beginning of this unit to be able to help your students see what they know already, and for you to find out what maybe they don't know, and then you'll be able to emphasize that with them as you go through the lessons. All right, I gotta move my bar around. So just a fun activity that my students have always enjoyed being able to do. Okay, I'm going to share with you some different areas of the lesson content. You can imagine that teaching students about taxes and income taxes is a big, tedious process. So it's definitely not something that you do in one day. So I'm just trying to pick some highlights from the lesson so that you'd be able to see what is included in that. So when we start this lesson, it begins with just kind of an overview of taxes, why we pay them, and help students recognize taxes they probably are paying already that maybe they don't recognize at all. So this is a slide that comes from the PowerPoint, and it just asks the students, like, what are taxes? So I usually let them guess and tell me what they know about it. And then we tell them that it's the sum of money that's demanded by the government. Like, we don't really have a choice to pay. We're citizens here, and this is what we need to do. And then we give them a little bit of background that we haven't just been paying taxes for a short while, but we've actually been paying them for over 100 years. So we give them some background about in 1862, Congress enacted their first income tax law because the government before then had been supported through taxes on things like sugar and tobacco and gold and silver and watches. But when the war came about, they needed to have some more steady income. So the Act of 1862 was based on a progressive taxation system. The more money you made, the more money that you would pay to the government for taxes. So we introduced that and then talked to them about the 16th Amendment. And that was when income taxes became a permanent part of what we do in our country. So you can give them some background about that. And then we try to tie in that being a citizen means you have a civic duty to pay taxes. So it's your responsibility to pay for this because of the benefits that we receive. So I love the benefits that some of you put in our Padlet. That was nice. And in our Take Charge lessons, one of the things that we emphasize a lot is that we're better off in a community than by ourselves. So I like to ask my students, would you be able to take care of your own education, your own scientific research, pave your own roads, have your own library, do those things that we get as government benefits? Or are you glad that you live in a country where the government provides those things for you? So you can have a pretty good conversation about that. This is another slide that helps the students see when we pay different kinds of taxes that they probably have paid already. So when we make purchases, we pay sales tax. When we put gas in our car, we pay for gasoline taxes. When we get paid, we pay our income taxes. And when we buy a car, the kids usually know that we pay sales tax, but in some states you pay property tax as well. So then you can tell them you're already paying these. And I usually say, when you go to put gas in your car next time, look on the gas pump and see if there's something on there about the amount of sales tax or the amount of gas tax that you're paying as part of that sale. And then they'll start being a little more observant of those things that are around them in their world. This is another slide that comes from the PowerPoint and that just kind of focuses on some benefits that we hope the students are familiar with. So getting roads repaired, their student loans come from a government benefit. We have our libraries, our parks, scientific research, protection that we get from police and fire. So just again, helping them realize that they probably know that they're getting some benefits, but now we're going to tie it into the taxes that people pay in our country. So once we've kind of done some of that overview of taxes and what's around them, then we jump into talking about what does the government do with the taxes that they receive. So the PowerPoint again shares with the students about tax income, or yeah, I guess that's the word I want to use, income that the government receives because of different things that people are paying. So you can see on here, personal income taxes is 40%. And then we've got the money that comes out of our paychecks that goes into Social Security and Medicare. So it gives you a chance to just share with the students some of these extra kinds of taxes that are available and that are out there. Usually, I will ask my students if any of them have ever gotten a bonus at work, and if they noticed that the bonus was taxed at a different rate than their regular paycheck was, because that is a tax that gets taxed a little bit higher. So bring in some of those details that will help them understand. And then this is a chart that shows where the government is spending the money. So every year the government updates these charts, and we update this PowerPoint for you so that you have current information. So if you want to teach your students about income taxes soon, just know that we've updated it for 2022. All the information is in there that you would need to help the students be receiving the correct information. So once we've talked about that, government gets money, receives money, and now they're going to spend money. This is one of the activities that we have in this lesson, which is choosing what's important to spend tax dollars on. In the lesson, we have these little cards that you can print and cut apart. And I usually do about 10 or 12 of them for my class, depending on how many students that I have. And we get to have a look at, these are some of the outlays, some of the areas that the government spends their money on. So before we get into this activity, I wondered if any of you have a really strong feeling about any of these programs that are listed on this slide that you think it's so important for the government to be spending money on. You can unmute or type it in the chat if any of these are super important to you. Less on defense. Yeah, some students are like that as well. And some of them are getting ready to join the military. And so they believe that's important. So thanks for sharing that, Nikki. Okay, I'm going to go to the second slide. Tell me if any of these are really important programs that you think we need to keep around. Oh, I'm glad somebody mentioned the environment. Thanks, Courtney. Thomas, I'm glad you like agriculture and natural resources. Social Security, please. Yeah, for those of us that are getting close to there. So just having these cards available, having these pictures really helps your students to be able to think about some of the programs that our government funds, some of the ways that they're getting benefits because of the taxes that they and other people pay. I usually will talk about health. I share a story about my daughter. My youngest daughter is named after one of my friends who passed away due to breast cancer. So I'll share a little bit about her story and tell the students, I think cancer is curable. I love that we're spending money to do research and to try and figure that out. That is super important to me. And then usually once I share them, we'll have students who will talk about some of these other areas, and they will be able to just share, just like our elected officials do when they're talking about the different programs and what should be funded and what should we cut funding in. So just kind of a fun way to have a conversation before you do the activity that goes along with the students. So I am going to give you another link. This is going into a Google form. And what I am asking you to do is to pick your top 3. So if you will do that, then we'll look at how, if you guys were our people that were making all those decisions, what would come up as the top 3 areas that we would want to spend our tax dollars on. So I'm going to share the results so you guys can see. So I'm so glad a bunch of teachers have decided that education is important. I did this activity just a little while ago with a different group of teachers, and a lot of them think we should privatize education. So it looks for us, this group that voted tonight, education was number 1, natural resources and social security are 2 and 3, and transportation is up there. I'm glad, because I sure would not want to be paving my own road and doing some things like that. So what I normally do with that activity, and Lisa put some ideas in the chat for those of you that are reading the chat. I usually start my students in small groups, maybe 3 or 4 of them together, and they have their envelope of those cards, and I make them prioritize them from least important to most important. And sometimes they will get a little bit stuck. And so I will have to go over and prompt them and say, okay, well, why don't you choose your top 3 and then choose your least favorite 3. So put them in order, what they would want first, second, third, and then what they want at the end, and then be able to kind of figure out in the middle. There's lots of negotiating that goes along with the activity. Sometimes people are really, really adamant about something that is important, a program that they do not want to get rid of. And sometimes kids are not very vocal and they just kind of go along with the group, which I figure that sometimes our politicians probably do that as well. Once they've done that in small groups, then I will make them join groups. So now we've got 2 different groups that are trying to make the same decisions. And then we'll go a little bit bigger and eventually we'll do it as a whole group. And usually, just so you know, this activity itself can take 1 to 2 class periods, just depending on how much time you want to spend having students share, having groups share, having them, sometimes I'll write on the board, what are your top 3? And we'll tally those up. And then what are your bottom 3? And then I'll put groups together that had somebody that had education as top and somebody had education in the bottom, and see how they can kind of work that out. Lisa also suggested if you cut out the cards to laminate them, because then you can use them over and over, and you can just have them nice and clean. Wash offable is what I like for that. So that's just an activity that gets students being able to think as a politician and how they really negotiate for programs. Want to see if you have any ideas about how you could customize this activity for your classes. So as we've just kind of gone through this quickly, do you have any ways that you could change it to match the students in your classroom?
I think for some of my students, I would need to explain what some of those programs are. They may not have the background because some of mine are 10th graders and they haven't had government yet.
Yeah, good, Courtney. And we actually have in the lesson plan, there's a reference sheet that actually lists the category and what that includes. So that would be a good thing you could hand to each group so that they can look through that. When I did the activity with adults, they wanted to check that as well. So just give them some of that information so they can see some of the details that are in there. So just a couple ideas that I came up with as I was thinking about my own students are some questions that I could ask at the end. So our government actually has some mandatory categories, mandatory programs, and I would want to see if they put any of those mandatory things in the bottom. So students these days, they're a long ways away from Social Security and Medicare, and they may have heard about all the money that is going out for that program, and they might want to get rid of it. So you could say, okay, well, if you get rid of Social Security and Medicare, where's that money going to go? What are you going to suggest takes its place? Is there something new that we would add? Or would you just add more funding to a different category that already exists? So think about that. Joy, that's a good idea to have them read about maybe some of the benefits of that particular program or what it has done recently to help people. So I love that. Okay, another question that you could ask is, let me see if I can get my clicker working here. How might these categories change as the baby boomer generation disappears? So if we have those cards, right, which ones are going to be impacted as baby boomers get older and die and are not part of our country anymore? And maybe what categories are most important to them. So hopefully some of that came out in their discussions, but feel free to have some of those discussions with the students as you go through there. Okay, so we've talked about taxes, where they come from, what the government does with them, and now we're going to get into employment and how is employment related to that. So I always like to start with helping them understand when you get a job, one of the forms you have to fill out is a W-4. And for the older kids, they've seen this paper. For younger kids, they may have not seen it. So you could print one out and show it to them and go through it and have them just look at the information that is collected on there. Make sure they understand this is something that they have to fill out every time they get a job, unless they are an independent contractor, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we start with a W-4. Teach them about it. I always like to tell my students every time a major life event happens. So again, this is a slide from the PowerPoint. You need to make a change. So if you get married or divorced, you need to fill out a new W-4. If you have a baby or two, you need to fill out a new W-4. If you lose a job, you're going to have to fill out a new one with your new employer. And within the lesson is a link to the IRS tax withholding estimating calculator. So something that you can take them to that's online, and they can actually put in information from their own paychecks if they have it, or you can make up some fictitious information and you can see it's going to ask them about themselves. Are you single or married? It's going to ask them about their income. So how much income are they getting it? Is it just from one source? Do they have two jobs? How do they get paid? It'll actually have them put in information from their most recent paycheck. How much money did they make? How much was taken out for taxes already? It'll ask them about deductions. So that's a topic that you will need to talk about as well, and it's in this lesson. And then it'll give them a result that says, okay, based on what's going on with this paycheck, you are either going to get a refund when you file your taxes, or you might have to owe. So it's something that can be tied into your other lessons if you are teaching the students about employment and helping them understand how to make those choices. This is part of the tax lesson as well. Jose Santiago is one of the characters in this lesson, and we use his paycheck and the wage bracket table to help students understand that the money taken out of your paycheck is not just taken willy-nilly by your employer, because we know everybody's first paycheck, they're like, wait a minute, where did all that money go? So we teach them how to read a tax table so that they can see he's paid biweekly, where that fits into the range. He's claiming he's single, and so where those two things match up is $150, and so his employer withholds that every 2 weeks. And that activity just helps students understand that process and how that works together. So that was our W-4. And then we get to the W-2, and we help the students understand that at the end of every year, your employer has to gather all the information about things that they have paid you or things they've deducted from your paychecks and has to summarize it for you on this W-2 form. So employees are going to use this to prepare their income taxes. And the employer needs to know that so that they can just have their records that they'll need to in case they need to show that. So what's on here is what your employer is sending to the IRS. And this form is going to be very useful and very important for you to have. Make sure that you have a conversation with the students about keeping track of their W-2, if they move, that they need to give their employer their new address, all those things that we know could go wrong with teenagers, that this is a super important document for them. We've also added in for students that maybe are paid as independent contractors, some information for them. So I know in Arizona, a lot of our employers are starting to hire people as independent contractors because that's cheaper for them. They don't have to take taxes out of your paycheck. You're responsible for that. So this just talks about some of the different jobs that you could have as an independent contractor, and that instead of getting the W-2, you're going to get this 1099 form. And it's, again, going to summarize that information about how much you were paid by a specific employer throughout the year. So if students are paid by multiple employers, we want them to understand to look for several of these in the mail, either W-2s if they had a couple of jobs, or these 1099 forms if possible. And then new to the tax scene is if people worked a side gig or sold goods and were paid not through an employer, but through a cash app like Venmo and Zelle. So we've introduced this year, that this is a different 1099 form that they would get if they have online, kind of an online store for themselves, or if this is the way people were paying them. And have a little note about why. Because probably if somebody's paying them through a cash app, they're not withholding their taxes. So this is the way that they have to report it for them. Okay, so we've done all that, and now we're on to actually filing your income taxes. And what does that include? We give them a little information about tax day on April 15th, have a little discussion about why that date changes sometimes, like it is this year. And that really, this is the day where you're comparing what you should have paid with what you're supposed to pay, what the government says from the tax table. So an important day to remember and to not forget. In the PowerPoint, we go through these 6 steps to help students understand that really doing your income taxes is not super complicated, especially at this point in their life. So we walk them through what kind of documents should you be gathering? Where do I get my 1040 form from? How do I fill it out? How do I reconcile? I need to sign it. I need to send it in, and different ways that they can do that. So we're going to practice an activity with Jeff and Darcy Naylor. So these people are embedded in the PowerPoint as well. And this is a practice that you can do with your students as you're first introducing them to how do I use the tax forms and fill out the information that is in there. So this is a Google document for you to open. It's going to have you do a forced copy of it so that you can have one that's blank. Normally, I like to pass out the printed paper copy for my students. I want them to have that. I want them to feel it. I want them to be able to read it because I feel like that's important to help their learning. But you can have them do this online if you want to. And you can see what I've given you is just kind of a modified version of the information that I would share with my students. So we introduce them to Darcy and Jeff. Darcy's a chef and Jeff is a computer technician. They're going to file jointly. So they're going to do married filing jointly. And because of that, we need to add together their income from box 1 of their W-2 form. So I've given you on your Google document, I've given you their W-2s, but we're going to add together Darcy's 40,126. Yes, I'm making you do some math tonight. And then we're going to add to that Jeff's 66,199. So on your Google form, go ahead and add those together, and you're going to add that into the box that goes with line 1A. Let me know in the chat if anybody was not able to open the Google document, but hopefully that worked fine for you. If anybody wants to cheat and put the answer in the chat for everybody that hates to do math, you can do that. One of the tips that I used when I was teaching my students how to use the tax forms is, you see on my screen, every place there's a math word, I would have my students highlight it. There's so much information on a tax form that is not going to apply to the kids, and they get lost in tip income and Medicaid waivers and employer provided adoption benefits and IRA distributions. They get lost in all these words and they want to know what they all are. And sometimes that just really overwhelms them. So when I handed them a paper and a highlighter, and I would say, I want you to look on side 1, and you're going to find 7 math words, or however many there were. And I make them read it. I make them read it line by line and look for those words. And then if they can't find them, I'll say, anybody want to give them a hint? And they'll say, go look at line 9 or whatever. So just a way to help them understand where they have to have numbers, because every place there's a math word, you got to have a number on the column where you put the numbers in. So just a tip for me in how I did it with my students. So as we're looking at this, we have 1A, we put a number on there, and now we have B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and Z. And so for most of the students, and especially for this activity we're doing with the nailers, they don't have any of that other kind of income. So the same number that you put on line A is the number you're going to put on line 1Z. And then we have all these other things. Some of our scenarios that we have do include taxable interest. So some of the scenarios, the students would put something on line 2B. When I did them, I would make up lots of different versions, and sometimes I would have them get dividends from stocks. So you can figure that out. There are other numbers that they might have to fill in at different points, but for Jeff and Darcy, all we had was their income. So if we look at 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we have nothing that goes in there. So the next number is going to go on line 9. And it's going to be the same as line 1Z, because we're just adding everything from 1Z clear down to line 9. So that would be the same. We don't have any adjustments because the nailers didn't have anything extra. And so then we're going to subtract 9 from 10. We didn't have anything on line 10, so that number was 0. So line 11 is going to be the same. So then the students are like, wow, we're repeating this number over and over. Yep, you just have to work through all the extra details that are in there to get to where we want to be. Okay, line 12 then brings us to our standard deductions. So I always have my students use their highlighter and circle that standard deductions bubble that is on the left-hand side so that they can see where that is. So next thing we have to do is say, well, what kind of deduction are they going to get? Well, Jeff and Darcy are married filing jointly. So that's going to be the second bullet down. And so line 12 is going to have $25,900. And then we're going to add lines 12 and 13. Put the answer on line 14. And then we're going to subtract 14 from 11. So Courtney, I love your question about tax preparation services. And I actually have a story that I tell my students, because I had a boy one day came into class and said, hey, Ms. Palmer, how much do you pay for somebody to do your taxes for you? And I said, I don't, I do them myself. And he went, oh, and I said, why, what happened? He said, I just paid somebody $120 to do my taxes. And I said, if you would have waited one more week, we're doing these starting tomorrow in class, and you would be able to do that. So I really try to encourage the students to try and do it themselves. And I get students whose parents have a tax preparation person do it for them, and so the kid just has them do it as well. But I still like them to have that skill. And even if you have somebody do them for you, you're still responsible for those numbers and making sure that you gave them the right information and everything's good. So I want them to understand that process as we go through there. Okay, so that number that you got hopefully matches mine, $80,425. And the PowerPoint does have the answers like this as you go through there. So the kids can work it out, you can answer questions, and then you can put up the answers and check. So the amount of money they're going to be taxed on was not their big amount, but this $80,425. And then you need to help them see the tax tables and what those look at like. So we've included that in the PowerPoint as well. So their taxable income was $80,425. We show them where to find that on the tax table. They're married, filing jointly. So their tax liability, the amount that they should have paid is $9,240. That point where those two lines are going to meet, those two arrows meet. So that's the number that's going to go on line 16. So go back. So that was 9,240. It's going to go on line 16. And then again, remember this is the backside, and I would have had my students highlight all of the math words again. So we're kind of looking where those math words are because that tells us what we need to do. So we're going to add 16 and 17 together. And 17 was 0, so that's going to be the same as 18. Then we're going to add 19 and 20 together. Normally, I stop and talk to the kids about if they have questions about what's the child tax credit or things like that. This lesson doesn't do that. So you can decide if you want to take time to explain things as you're teaching them about taxes, or if you just want them to be able to kind of move forward. And anything that seems weird, we're just going to skip it, or we're going to put a 0 on there. So we can work down through lines 18 and then 21 and 22 and 24. High school kids, I'm not sure why they struggle with subtraction, but I'd always have kids when they had to subtract 21 from 18, they'd get a negative number, or they would do something and I'd say, nope, okay, start with 18 minus 21. That's what we're going to do to get it. And then we'll have them look at back to our W-2. So now we've got to see how much taxes were taken out of our paychecks. And so we're going to go back to box 2 on our W-2 forms. Jeff and Darcy are married, so we have to add those together again. And then you'll see the number that should go on line 25A.
Hey, Robin, how do you handle questions about using tax preparation software, or even, I know I've used myfreetaxes.com for years. And so they won't actually need to figure out the tax table. I mean, I know it's an important skill that they understand the tax table, but then if they're doing them for real, they might not even encounter a tax table.
Yeah. I still like them to be able to read it. I think it's a great math skill. And my class is a financial math class, so that's super important that they can look at tables and read things like that. I always made my students do it on paper first. I said, even if you're going to pay somebody or you're going to pay TurboTax when you make more money to do it online, I want you to understand the process. So you can decide if you have kids who are just going to fight, you can skip this paper version. But I always thought there was value in helping my students kind of go through it and understand what's in there. Because I know on TurboTax, they'll ask them a bunch of questions. You know, has anything changed from last year to this year? And I want them to understand where those are going to fit in this form. So that's just my choice. You figure out what'll work for you, for your kids. So we get to the point where we have the numbers all filled in. And then we're going to come to the fun part, right? Do they get a refund or do they owe? So we have them look at line 34 to see if 33 is more than 24. Are they going to get a refund? If not, than they're going to owe later on. So that just kind of brings them down to the bottom. So that whole scenario is in the PowerPoint, and you can walk through walk through it with your students if you want to, and have them do it that way. I transition from the paper version, then we go do one online, so they can kind of take that same information from Jeff and Darcy and fill it in and see if they get the same answers. So that just kind of helps them make that connection. But here's to your questions. So I Googled, like, why should you have students do this? So these were not my answers, but what other teachers had. So definitely a good skill for them to have. Helps their brain development, helps them look through pages of lines and lines of information. I would give my students a ruler so we could do one line at a time down the form. Otherwise, a lot of them would get overwhelmed. So good skill for them to develop. If they learn how to do it themselves, when they start making more money, where they would have to pay for a preparer service, they can choose whether to do it themselves or not. And so they can see, well, if I pay $150 a year for how many years, how much money am I paying for somebody to do that for me when I know I could do it myself? And in some communities, if your students are 18 and they can pass a basic tax preparation test, they can actually go work for some of the companies and do basic taxes. For somebody that just has a W-2, your kids can make money using that skill for somebody else. So that's usually what I share with students to be able to help them understand why. So just some ideas on how you could customize this depending on your students. So Jeff and Darcy do together, and then we have scenarios in the lesson. So you could have them work together to complete the scenario. So that will build their confidence in being able to do that. You can fill out the tax forms, but make some mistakes and then give it to the kids and let them look for errors. So have them find the mistake. And when we practice taxes, I had the answers on the board, like this is what you should have for your taxable income, and this is what you should have had from the tax table. So I put some key numbers on the board so that if they got to that line and they didn't have the correct answer, they could go back and kind of see what they missed, or did they just add or subtract wrong or something like that. So let them be the auditors. Or you can have the kids do a scenario independently and then they trade with each other. So now you're auditing somebody else's. So just a way to kind of customize it for those kids that are in your class to help them understand. How can you explain an audit? Well, I've been audited, so I would just share with my students my own personal experience and what I was audited for. I would also tell them that if you make a math mistake, somebody at the IRS will make the correction for you, and then they'll send you a corrected version. So it happened to one of my friends last year, and he got, here's your corrected version, and you owe us $750. So anything that I can share with my students that's real world and real life, I like to do that. That's another reason why I like that home talk, where they can go talk to other people about their experience with taxes and get somebody's opinion that's other than mine. So if you do not have a free account from Take Charge Today, this is the website that you would go to. So www.takechargetoday.arizona.edu. We are based out of the University of Arizona down in Tucson. And Tiffany, who you see with us today, she is kind of the behind the scenes person who manages all of this. So you'll need to get a free account, but then you'll have access to the whole PowerPoint and the lesson plan that tells you everything you need to talk about on each slide, and the paper versions of those activities that I did with you. So that's where you can get the full PowerPoint that has everything in there. So we created 3 different activity card decks that you can see. They just go on playing cards, but it has a file that you can print on sticker paper and then print them, put them in a box so you can use them for different activities. So the deck that is shown has to do with companies. You could use this with students if you're having them work on stock market game, or if you're a marketing teacher and you wanted them to design a new logo for a company. This is just that. So we're going to give you a deck of cards as well as one of our t-shirts that we created this year that just has quick lesson about money on earn, save, invest, and repeat. We are having another workshop. So if you liked our Take Charge lesson, and this is something that's new to you, I'm going to share my screen. We have a workshop that's coming up in March that we would invite you to, that has to do with our entrepreneurship lessons that we have created. So on March 29th, same time as we were here tonight. So we're glad you guys took time tonight to come be with us. If you can't tell, I love teaching students about taxes. I think it's just a skill that they should develop and something that will help them as they move forward in their lives to become adults. So I am available. You can see my email that's on there. But also if you email just our general email for Take Charge today, Tiffany gets those messages and they will get. But thanks for coming. I hope this was worth your hour tonight. And hopefully we'll see you again in the future.